Colorado Territory. Spring of 1874, the wind tore through the valley like it had something to prove. Jessa Dalton's boots scraped against the dry wooden porch of the sheriff's office in the mining town of Ridgetop, her hands clenched tight at her sides. The sun was high, but her skin felt cold. She heard the door creak behind her and knew before turning that Sheriff Morley was coming to collect. "You sure you want to do this?" the sheriff asked, voice low. Jessa didn't answer. She just looked past him at the man waiting across the street, Franklin Baird. He leaned against the post outside the saloon, arms crossed, mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. His black coat flapped in the wind. He was older now, but the years hadn't changed what was inside. Jessa's stomach turned. She remembered the way his voice used to follow her down the hall when she worked at her uncle's ranch. The way he'd cornered her in the stables when no one was looking. Now the law said she had to marry him. The sheriff had no choice. Franklin had a forged letter from her late uncle naming him as her guardian, and her uncle's debts had left her with no land, no money, and no protection. Franklin had offered to take care of her. The town council saw it as a kindness, but it was not kindness. It was ownership. Sheriff Morley gave a nod to his deputy, and the tall, broad man on Jessa's right took a step forward, hand ready to guide her across the street. She felt the push before she saw it coming. A firm hand pressed against her back, urging her toward the man she feared. Then a voice rang out, sharp and clear, "Not while I'm here." Everyone turned. The cowboy stood just beyond the hitching rail, dust clinging to his coat, hat low over his eyes. His horse was still breathing hard behind him, like they had ridden fast to get here. His name was Rowan Pierce. She knew him. He had arrived in Ridgetop 6 weeks ago, quiet and alone, taking work where he could. He had helped her once when her wagon wheels split on the trail. Said little, but his hands had been gentle when they lifted the heavy axle. Since then, he had tipped his hat when they passed, nothing more. But now he was stepping between her and Franklin like a man ready to draw steel. Franklin's voice came out like a growl. "This ain't your business, Pierce." Rowan's eyes didn't leave Jessa. "It is now." The sheriff stepped forward. "Rowan, you need to stand down. The papers are legal." "No," Rowan said, slow and even, "they are not. I sent a wire to Denver 2 days ago. Her uncle's real will is filed there, left the ranch to her free and clear. Franklin forged the rest." Jessa stared. Her breath caught in her throat. "You did what?" Rowan finally looked at her, and something in his face softened. "You deserve better than this." Franklin stepped forward, hand twitching near his belt. Rowan shifted, the wind pressing his coat back just enough to reveal the revolver at his hip. His stance was calm, but his eyes were fire. Franklin froze. The sheriff squinted at Rowan. "You got proof?" Rowan pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it over. "Came in on the morning stage." The sheriff read it, jaw tightening. Then he turned to Franklin. "Get off this street, Baird. You try anything else and I'll see you in a cell." Franklin stared at Jessa, something ugly in his eyes, then spat in the dirt and walked off, his boots stomping like thunder. The silence that followed was heavy. Jessa looked at Rowan, her voice small. "Why would you do that?" "For me," Rowan rubbed the back of his neck. "Because no one else did." She stepped closer. "You barely know me." "I know enough." His voice dropped. "I know what fear looks like." She blinked. "You knew Franklin would try this." He nodded once. "Men like him, they always do." Jessa swallowed hard. "I thought I was alone." "You are not." Rowan's voice was steady like the ground itself. She felt her knees go weak, but she did not fall. She breathed in deep, the air sharp with pine and dust. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to safety. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the town settled back into its usual rhythm, Rowan found her outside the boarding house. She sat on the bench, hands folded in her lap. He did not speak right away. Just sat beside her, she asked. "Why did you really come to Ridgetop, Rowan?" He hesitated, then said, "I was looking for quiet. Been carrying things too long. Thought maybe I could find a place to set them down." "And did you?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "Maybe." There was a long silence, but it was not uncomfortable. She said, "You risked a lot today." "I would again," he replied without hesitation. Jessa turned toward him, the setting sun casting gold across his face. "You should come by the ranch sometime." "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "It's mine now. I think I would like to see what it looks like with someone decent standing on it." Rowan smiled just a little. "Then I will." And in that moment, sitting side by side as the sky turned orange and the world slowed down, something settled between them, something quiet and sure. Neither of them said the word for it. Not yet. But it was there. The road out to Jess's ranch wore the silence of long forgotten trails. Dust curled up from the horse's steps as Rowan rode beside her, the late afternoon sun low enough to stretch their shadows long across the prairie grass. She hadn't spoken much since they left town, and he hadn't pressed her. Some wounds needed their own time to breathe. The land rolled open ahead, rimmed by pine hills and scattered cottonwoods greening early with spring. Fencing leaned in places, but the pasture still held its shape. The barn stood at the back edge of the property, roof sagging on one corner. The house, though whitewashed and square, had held steady through winter. A few shingles were gone and the porch rail was cracked, but it stood. "Didn't know if I'd ever see it again," Jessa said, slowing her horse. Rowan kept his eyes on the barn. "You held on." "I didn't, not really." "You did." He shook his head. "I just brought the truth. You did the rest." She dismounted, boots landing in the dry grass. He followed, tying his horse beside hers at the rail. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of old pine and warming earth. She walked ahead toward the porch, fingers brushing the split rail as she passed it. Inside, the air was dry with disuse, but it smelled of cedar and something faintly sweet. Rowan paused in the doorway, waiting. Jessa crossed to the hearth, brushing her hand over the mantel where a single photo still sat, her uncle, stiff and formal, a young girl at his side. Her dress was too big, her eyes too wide. "I used to sit right there," she said, motioning to the woven rug, "and read aloud to him after supper." He never said much, but he listened. Rowan stepped in, removing his hat. "That where you learned to read so well?" She glanced over. "I taught myself most of it. He gave me the books, though." Said a girl ought to know more than just chores. "You speak like someone who's lived through hard things." "I have." She turned to face him. "But I'm not broken." Rowan didn't answer right away. He looked at her, truly looked, and something in his posture eased. "I never thought you were." The words hung between them, quiet and steady. "You hungry?" she asked. "I could be." She smiled just a little. "There's beans and cornmeal in the cellar, might be dried apples too." "I'll fetch wood." They moved without fuss. She lifted the trapdoor in the kitchen floor and disappeared below. He stepped back outside and gathered what he could from the pile near the barn, snapping off what was too long. By the time he returned, she had a pot ready on the stove and the apples soaking in a bowl. They ate at the small table by the window, knees close beneath it. The light faded slow, painting the walls in gold and then gray. She set her spoon down. "You ever stay long in one place?" His jaw shifted slightly. "Not lately." "Why?" He folded his hands. "I was married once." That drew her still. "She died," he added. "Fever caught her before the doctor could ride out. That was in Kansas 6 years back." Jessa didn't speak. She only reached for the pot and quietly poured the last of the beans into his bowl. He looked down at it. "You don't have to be kind." "I'm not being kind," she said softly. "I'm being fair." He nodded once. "That's rarer than kindness." They washed the dishes together. She dried while he rinsed. The lamp burned low. Outside, the wind had gone still and the quiet wrapped around the house like a quilt. "You can take the room upstairs," she said. "It's clean, I'll sleep down here." Rowan hesitated. "I can stay in the barn." She turned toward him. "You didn't ride all this way to sleep in the hay," he met her eyes. "I didn't ride all this way just for the ride, either." Her fingers curled around the edge of the towel. "I know." He stepped back, slow and careful. "I'll rise early, check the fence line, see what needs mending." She nodded. "There's tools behind the barn." They stood for a long moment, neither reaching, both rooted. Then he turned and climbed the steps, boots slow on the boards. She waited until the door upstairs clicked shut before she let her hand rest flat on the table, steadying herself against the weight of something new. Not fear, not loneliness, something else entirely. The next morning came pale and quiet. A thin mist clung low over the pasture, softening the edges of fence posts and rock piles. Rowan moved down the steps with a slow tread, the boards cool under his boots. Jessa was already outside, near the paddock. She had tied her hair back with a strip of blue calico and was hauling a bucket toward the trough. He crossed the yard without calling out. She looked over once, then turned back to her work. "You sleep any?" "Enough," he said. She emptied the bucket, water splashing clear and cold into the trough. "I think the well needs looking at. Pump's been stiff. I'll take a look after the fence." She stepped back and wiped her hands on her skirt. "I can walk the line with you. You don't have to, I know." She met his eyes. "I want to." They saddled up and rode the perimeter slow, the horses picking their way over uneven ground. The fence had held better than expected, though near the north end, a post leaned hard from frost heave. Rowan dismounted and grabbed the shovel from his saddle scabbard. Jessa crouched beside the next post, running one hand along the wire. "Used to be my uncle made me do this every other week," she said. "Said I'd thank him someday." "Do you?" She looked up at him. "I do now." He tamped the earth down firm. "He leave you any tools worth keeping?" "Most of 'em." "There's a grindstone and a hand drill in the shed. You're welcome to use anything." He nodded. "Appreciate it." They mounted again and rode on. By the time they circled back to the barn, the sun had burned off the last of the mist. Jessa swung down first and paused, looking toward the hills that rose beyond the far pasture. "Franklin used to say he'd build a bigger house up there," she said. "Said this one wasn't fit for a ranch boss." Rowan followed her gaze. "He's still bothering you, he hasn't come around." "But I don't trust quiet from men like him. I'll stay close." She turned to him, her voice low. "You don't owe me that." "I know," he said, "but I'm offering it." She looked down at the dust on her boots. "I don't like owing folks either." He stepped back to give her space. "Then we'll call it an understanding." Later that afternoon, they cleaned the shed. Dust rose in lazy spirals as they pulled out tools long buried under burlap sacks and broken crates. Jessa found a rusted bridle and held it up, brow furrowed. "This was my father's," she said. "He died before I was 10. I barely remember his voice." Rowan reached for the bridle and set it gently on the shelf. "You don't have to keep what hurts." "It doesn't hurt, it's just worn." They worked until the light changed. Supper was quiet again, but not stiff. Afterward, Jessa stepped onto the porch and leaned against the post. Rowan came out and joined her, arms folded. A pair of hawks circled above the far ridge, wings catching the last of the gold. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "What would that look like for you?" He was quiet a long time. Then, "A piece of land, a roof that doesn't leak, someone who wants me home at the end of the day." Jessa didn't answer right away. "That sounds like more than quiet." Rowan's voice was steady. "I'm learning to want more." She turned to face him. "You think you could want it here? I think I already do." The wind lifted the edge of her sleeve. She didn't step back. "You'd have to work beside me," she said. "No man sits idle on this land. I wouldn't ask to. And I don't take kindly to being told what to do. I've seen that for myself." She smiled, slow and real, the first one he'd seen from her like that. "Then maybe you'll last." He tipped his hat back. "Maybe I will." They stood there until the light faded completely, the porch wrapped in the hush of evening. No promises were spoken. But something important had shifted, quiet as breath, steady as dawn. By the second week, the work had settled into a rhythm. Rowan rose early, splitting wood before the sun reached the ridge, while Jessa moved through the house with a quiet confidence, mending what needed mending, making lists in her head of what could wait and what couldn't. On a pale Thursday morning, she stood on the porch, sleeves rolled to the elbow, watching him tack up a third rail behind the chicken pen. He worked with a precise calm, sleeves rolled, collar open, hand steady. She stepped down and crossed the yard. "You handle tools like you were born with one in your hand," she said. Rowan glanced up. "My father ran a mill, said a man ought to know the weight of things before he tries to change them." She leaned against the fence, arms folded. "You speak of him like he's still walking. He isn't. Drowned in the flood of '69 back in Missouri. I was 20. After that, I left the river towns and never looked back." Jessa studied him a moment. "You ever think about going east again?" "No call for it," he said. "What's gone is gone." She nodded once, then looked toward the ridge. "I've been thinking about putting in a kitchen garden. Potatoes, maybe cabbage, the soil near the spring softer. I can help you clear it. You already do enough. I don't draw lines when I care about something." She went still, eyes flicking to his. "You saying that now?" He held her gaze. "I reckon I am." She stepped back, boots pressing a new path into the dirt. "There's a man in town named Elijah Ramey. He was my uncle's friend. Used to ride out and trade lumber for eggs and preserves. He knew the land papers were wrong, but he kept quiet." Rowan straightened. "You want to speak to him?" "I don't know what I want yet, but I won't forget who stood silent. You don't have to carry all of it alone." She met his eyes again. "I've had to, for a long time. Then let this be different." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. That afternoon, the chickens broke through a gap in the wire and scattered into the field. Rowan dropped his hammer without a word and jogged after them, hat low, voice calm. Jessa followed, laughing for the first time in days as he cornered a red hen behind a tree stump and lifted it like a child. "You're better with animals than most men are with people," she said, breath short. "They don't lie," he said, carrying the hen back. "People do." She opened the gate for him. "You're not wrong." That evening, she sat beside the hearth with a tin of needles and a ripped feed sack across her lap. Rowan sat across from her, whittling a crooked piece of pine into something that vaguely resembled a horse's head. "I never did ask," she said. "What brought you to Ridgetop before all this?" "I was following a letter. A friend from Texas wrote me about a cattle outfit needing hands. By the time I got here, they'd hired on elsewhere. So you stayed anyway." "I saw a woman loading sacks into a wagon outside the mercantile. No one helped, not even the storekeep. You lifted both sacks like you were made of iron and didn't look at anyone." She set her sewing down. "That was me." "It was," he said, "and I thought there's someone who's been through fire." Jessa's voice softened. "And you thought you'd stay near the heat. I thought maybe it'd feel like home." She looked down, fingers still. "You think this could be home, then?" "I do." He didn't touch her, didn't offer some easy stroke of her hand or brush of shoulders, but she felt it just the same, that something in him had settled, like a stone that had finally found the bottom of the creek. When she stood to bank the fire, he rose too. "You don't have to turn in yet," she said. "I think I will," he said. "Tomorrow we can start digging for that garden." She nodded. "I'll mark the spot with that old shovel." He smiled then, faint but deep in the eyes. "I'll see you in the morning." And he climbed the stairs slow, every step sounding like a promise. By the third Sunday, the garden rows were cut straight and deep, the soil dark and turned. Jessa stood barefoot in the furrows, skirt hitched above her ankles, holding a tin of seed potatoes against her hip. Rowan worked beside her, sleeves damp with sweat, planting each cut piece with the same care he gave to fence lines and roof beams. She knelt in the dirt, pressed a seed into the earth, and said, "You ever think about what comes next after planting?" Rowan didn't look up. "Always. I mean more than harvest." He paused then. "You asking if I see myself staying? I'm asking if you want to." He dropped another piece into the row. "I do." The sun climbed higher, and the scent of warm soil mixed with the faint sweetness of prairie sage. When the rows were full and the tin was empty, Jessa stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and looked around the field as if seeing it with new eyes. "I used to think growing things was just work," she said. "Now I think it's proof." "Proof of what?" "That something good can start in the dark and still come up whole." He watched her for a moment. "You've got a way of saying things that sticks." "I've had a lot of quiet to think." They walked back up toward the house, Rowan carrying the empty tin. At the door, she stopped suddenly and turned to him. "I was wrong about Elijah Ramey," she said. Rowan's brow lifted slightly. "He came by yesterday, dropped off a sack of nails and a fresh ledger. Said he heard the ranch was under new hands and that it was time to make things right." "You believe him?" "I believe he's trying to." They stepped inside where the air was cool from the thick stone walls. She poured water from the pitcher, handed him a cup. "I've been thinking about the barn loft," she said. "We could clear it for hay next week, maybe start keeping more stock." Rowan drank, then set the cup down. She looked at him then, steady. "I don't want this to be borrowed, not your help, not your time. I want you here, not just passing through." He didn't speak, just stepped forward and reached out to take her hand. "I've had a long road behind me," he said, "but I've never found ground that felt like mine until now." Her fingers tightened around his. "Then stay." They stood like that, neither moving, the room holding still around them. Outside, a meadowlark called once, then again. That night they shared supper on the porch, their plates balanced on their knees. The sky turned violet, and the air softened with the scent of lilac from a bush she hadn't noticed blooming near the well. After the dishes were done and the lamp trimmed low, she took his hand and led him to the room upstairs. There, they moved without hesitation, quiet and certain. When he touched her, it was with reverence, as though he were learning a language he already half knew. She traced the scar on his shoulder without asking its story. He kissed her like he had time to remember every breath between them. Later, with her head tucked beneath his chin, she whispered, "I don't feel afraid anymore." He ran his hand through her hair once, slow. "You never needed a man to feel safe, but I'll spend my life making sure you never feel alone again." She closed her eyes and let herself believe it. They were married on a warm June morning, beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. Sheriff Morley officiated. Elijah Ramey brought a wooden bench he'd carved himself as a wedding gift, and the boarding house cook baked a honey cake that leaned slightly to one side. Jessa wore a dress she sewed from unbleached muslin, simple and strong. Rowan trimmed his beard and wore his father's watch pinned to his vest. They said their vows with no trembling, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty of two people who had earned each other the long way around. After, they danced in the field behind the barn while the town fiddler played. As the sun slipped low, Rowan pulled her close and said, "This is what comes next." She smiled against his shoulder. "It's more than I hoped for." Years passed, but the house never sagged. The garden grew fuller with each season: beans, squash, corn tall enough to whisper. They built a second barn, took in 2 orphaned colts, and raised hens that scratched under the porch steps. Children came in their own time, a boy with Rowan's quiet eyes and a girl with Jessa's strong chin. They learned the weight of tools and the shape of trust. They learned to listen before speaking, and that love could be steady as stone. Rowan never left again. Jessa never had to ask him to stay. And neither one of them ever forgot the day he stepped between her and the past and chose to stand there for good.